Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. For many researchers and research software engineers, the Collaborations Workshop in the UK needs little introduction. It's simply an institution. An institution that's been running for well over 10 years. Organised by the UK Software Sustainability Institute, it is a unique space to bring together researchers, team leaders, funders, community managers and, yes, research software engineers from across the country and indeed the globe. Over a couple of days, they meet and explore new ideas and concepts around software engineering and research, and really anything in between. Far from being a talking shop, previous Collaborations workshops have launched important and influential initiatives and campaigns over the years, not least research software engineering itself, which came out of a Collaborations workshop held in Oxford in 2012. There's going to be more about the history of Collaborations workshops a little bit later when I talk to one of the organisers, Shoaib. This year, 2024, the Collaborations workshop took place at the University of Warwick near Coventry between the 30th of April and the 2nd of May. The event was sponsored by the Wellcome Trust as Platinum sponsor and the Alan Turing Institute as a Gold sponsor. And like the workshop in 2023, the organisers made this a hybrid event and gave people who couldn't make their way to the venue a chance to join. And there were indeed a number who did join remotely. As for the people attending in person, there were about 150 who assembled in the Scarman building on the campus of Warwick University, and this year, and for the first time, I was one of them. The focus was on three main themes: environmental sustainability, artificial intelligence and machine learning tools for science, and finally, citizen science. I want to start with AI and machine learning tools for science. Arfon Smith from GitHub kicked off the proceedings with a keynote on the first day. GitHub is, of course, known for its implementation of a generative AI tool called Copilot. Arfon gave us a rundown on how Copilot can help in programming and what to look out for when using it. Interestingly, when Arfon asked the audience how many have used the tool, almost half of the people in the lecture hall raised their hands. I met with Arfon after his keynote to talk to him about generative AI and software engineering. And just before I met him, he was in deep discussion with Neil Chu-Hong, the director of the Software Sustainability Institute, on how Copilot and similar tools may impact the work research software engineers do, a point I returned to in my chat with Arfon. So here it is.
My name is Arfon Smith. I'm a product manager working at GitHub. I work on Copilot. And by way of a little bit of background, I have a PhD in astrochemistry from some time ago, quite a long time ago. And I've sort of been in and out of academia building tools for researchers most of my career.
And Copilot is actually more or less what you've given a talk on. Well, not Copilot in general, but generative AI and the way it hangs it together with generating code.
GitHub's Copilot started as this code generation product in the IDE. I sort of wanted today spend a little bit of time talking about some of the opportunities, which I think are really real. And I'll say that in my experience of talking to folks that are sort of research adjacent, so either people who are in academia or research software engineers, I think people are probably more skeptical than they should be, in the sense that I think there's quite a lot of opportunity for value. And I think what a lot of people have done, in my experience, is tried some of these tools 2+ years ago and sort of gone, this isn't very good, and haven't looked back. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time just saying, in defense of them, I guess, actually, sort of, I think I introduced my biases as I'm cautiously optimistic. But again, it's GitHub that pays my mortgage. So there you go.
You can hardly argue with that.
Right.
Now, I was actually quite surprised because there are a lot of people now in the room where we were who used and tested Copilot.
Yes.
There's also a lot of skepticism, like you said.
Right. So I would separate, people are finding GitHub's Copilot is generally pretty useful for lots of developers. I think what I saw in the hands in the room was that people are somewhat skeptical about generative AI at large for lots of good reasons, but that I think the people using Copilot typically are pretty happy.
So one of the elephants in the room was, how is this going to change the role of research software engineering?
Yep.
And I'm not quite sure if there is an answer to that yet, because none of us have a crystal ball, but what's your guess?
So I tried to write a talk that just talked about the subject, and it proved too hard. I think it's a great breakout session for this workshop. I think things that are uncontroversial, the barrier to entry for writing code is reducing. So it's going to be easier to write code if you are not an expert coder. And so I think that means within research, I think that means the research group or the PI or the academics are going to write more code. And that will be good and bad, I will suspect. Like, I think some of that code will be great and that will lower the barrier to entry, and other code will be, they will make some mistakes and you'll have to spend time fixing them. And I guess if I had to predict, if you didn't change the number of people, the number of research and software engineers in a group, I would guess that RSEs are going to spend more time reviewing code than writing code than they are today, I think.
But at the same time, whatever comes out of Copilot or whatever other generative AI tool you might be using, how would you be able to assess the quality if you're not that experienced?
I think the answer there is it's partly on the tools to generate good code. We do a lot of work to, when building Copilot, to try and make the suggestions as high quality as possible. So there's lots of techniques that we do there. I think what I would say is there is for sure a role for humans in the review and evaluation of code. And so one of the things that we feel pretty strongly at GitHub about is Copilot is not a new engineer on your team that's shipping features. This is a tool that can help the people on the team go faster, and that you should not be thinking about that now I don't need to do code review or now I don't need to write tests. That's exactly the wrong response. So I think, how would you know the code is wrong, or how do you know it's wrong today? I think you review it. It's not changing that part of work today. I know there are tools out there that are trying to sort of build a completely standalone sort of, I delegate responsibility just to this AI to do this work and build this feature. I think that's much harder.
Is there some evidence now that actually Copilot or similar tools do speed up development?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of studies, some done by us, some done by, there's a big one done by Accenture, one of the big consultancies that did an internal study with about 500 of their own internal engineers. We measure as a product team how often suggestions are accepted and incorporated into the code. So when Copilot suggests code to you, do you take that suggestion? So we call that acceptance rate. That's one measure we use internally as a team. That's typically around 30 to 50% of the time people accept the suggestion. Then others, we've helped with some of these studies. There's been quite a few now. The biggest one, I think, is Accenture, are measuring developer productivity directly, where they're saying, tracing that code through to production and then asking their engineering teams, are they happy? How do they feel about having Copilot help them? And the results are very positive. I think without question that Copilot as it exists today is a product that people enjoy using.
You mentioned Copilot GitHub.
Yes.
There seem to be more Copilots now.
There are.
How many Copilots do we have?
Probably more than we can count now. So for background, GitHub's Copilot was the first one. It went to technical preview in June 2021. You could pay for it in June 2022, and GitHub is owned by Microsoft. My assumption of how this worked was that Microsoft said, gosh, that's a really good name, and realized that they wanted to reuse that name. So there is a Office 365 Copilot now, and it is not GitHub's Copilot, it's the Office 365 Copilot. So the idea is this assistive AI tool, and Microsoft's names for those is Copilots. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I've seen companies outside of Microsoft and GitHub also using that name. And so I think it's become a little bit like a generic term at this point.
Exactly. I don't know if you can answer this, but I think in the talk you mentioned that it's based on ChatGPT 3. We're now at version 4, and I think version 5 is coming out at some stage. So is version 4 next on the list?
Yeah, so there's lots of different models being used under the hood. So the code generation part of Copilot is actually a GPT 3.5 variant today. I think it's the Codex model. So this is models that have been fine-tuned to generate source code rather than natural language. And then we use that in combination with also GPT-4 as well. So we use a collection of different models under the hood. And in the long run, we expect that we'll use many, many models for specialized tasks. But today it's mostly GPT 3.5 Turbo and 4 and 4 Turbo. So, and when 5 comes out, I'm sure everyone will want to use that too.
As Arfon mentioned, generative AI is meant to be assisting software engineers, not replacing them. Having said this, there was quite a bit of skepticism in the audience. This became more apparent in one of the first workshops I attended. There we looked at how AI tools like Copilot are being used in earnest, where they can help, and what the potential downsides are. The people who use Copilot brought up a number of benefits, like for instance when writing unit tests or documentation. Some use it for getting ideas on how to write a particular code section or use it as a starting point for a function or a new class. But what everybody agrees on is that you can't just take the code that comes out of it as is. Sometimes it's okay, but more often than not, it needs to be changed. In short, you're not getting around having a deeper understanding of software engineering in general and programming languages in particular to get the best out of generative AI tools. Again, as Arfon said, and it can't be repeated often enough, it is an assisting tool, not a new engineer on your team. But the problem is, as we found in our discussion, not every researcher who codes is an experienced software engineer. In fact, a considerable number of researchers come to programming as complete novices. So how can they assess the quality and use of code generated by AI? And isn't there a danger that we are de-skilling people by treating programming almost like a black box? I spoke to one of the participants of this workshop, Becky from Newcastle University, after the session.
I'm Becky Osselton. I'm a senior research software engineer at Newcastle University.
Okay, and we've been just in this workshop about the best tools for generative AI after this morning's keynote session. So what do you make out of it all?
I mean, it's a really interesting discussion, isn't it? Because it's obviously an area that's like growing, probably particularly in the RSE community and obviously in wider development sectors as well. The room was a bit kind of divided about it, wasn't there? Some people were like, yes, this is a great idea. Other people were a bit like, oh no, I'm not sure. Personally, I think I've been in that kind of I'm not sure camp for a while. There are people in the team at Newcastle who are using GitHub Copilot. I have seen it demonstrated to myself and thought, yeah, that looks quite nifty, to be honest. Yeah. But up till now, I've been a bit kind of resistant to actually doing anything with it.
What's the cause of your resistance?
I mean, it's probably like a few different factors. I mean, probably first one, fear of the unknown. Like, well, I haven't done this before. And I know we always have to learn new things, but, obviously I've kind of comfortable with my own code writing habits. It's been one of those things that I've kind of thought, well, I will look at it, but maybe just not now. But then I think I've probably reached a kind of tipping point where I think, yes, this is definitely worth exploring.
So when you get back to Newcastle, you're going to start straight away then?
I don't know. I probably will fairly soon. I use VS Code. I think it's a plugin. I'm not sure I don't know if you pay for it or not. Or
with an academic account, you're probably getting it for free.
I think it probably is. But I think definitely as well, from the discussion from people today who are using it, I really think it probably would increase the speed of which I write code in certain circumstances. But it does seem like a key to being able to use it properly is actually knowing how to instruct it and what it needs to write. And I think that's probably a bit of a skill in itself.
It is, yeah. It's a kind of prompt engineering. So what kind of code do you normally write in Newcastle? What's the kind of area? Is it across the board then, or is it just specialized in particular areas?
It is broad. I'm a web developer, typically write with JavaScript frameworks and other stuff, yes. But obviously in the team, we have like a web and mobile team who are typically using JavaScript and Python. We also have a middleware and data science team. They use a lot of Python, but some of them may be, writing with MATLAB or different, or C++ even, lots of different languages.
I personally haven't tried out Copilot yet. But what I could hear from the people in the room and elsewhere was that apart from the potential of producing software faster, it will also have an impact, perhaps even a profound one, on the way research software engineering is done in future, or even what it means to be a research software engineer. At the same time, this is exactly the moment for RSEs to get involved and help shape the way in which these tools are being used in science. The debates about pros and cons were still going on, but in the afternoon I wanted to go to a session about a very different subject, funding, particularly funding of open source software in research. Lisa Murphy from the Wellcome Trust sat down with a number of us to have a frank discussion about how the Wellcome Trust can support open source software projects in future. Anyone who has spent any time with research software engineers will be familiar with the following main pain points: the lack of recognition, the fact that funding is often restricted to creating the software but not for maintaining it, the fact that a number of engineers are on temporary contracts. All of that is well known. With that in mind, there was a general appreciation in the room that the Wellcome Trust, as one of the leading funding agencies of science, sat down with us and went through them one by one. I caught up with one of the participants the following day, Dave Horsfall, to talk about this session. Here's Dave.
My name's Dave Horsfall. I'm head of biomedical research software at Newcastle University.
And you went to the funders discussion mini workshop yesterday.
That's right.
So what did you take away from it?
So I thought it was a really interesting discussion, and I know that Wellcome have done quite a big piece of engagement over the last year around kind of scientific software usability and how the funder and how Wellcome in particular can better support that kind of activity in research. So the purpose of the session yesterday, I think, was for them to kind of feedback some very early findings that they have after that research, but then also engage the research software community in this really collaborative workshop environment on what the main pain points are in terms of that usability and supporting it in research, and what specific actions and problems there are and things like that, how they can use that to drive their finding and activities in the future as well.
So what are the pain points for you then?
So I think from a funding perspective, it's what kind of activity is valuable to Wellcome, and do they recognize the value of research software engineering in the grant calls that they have. So when it's specifically about research, how much are they willing to fund best practice in software engineering and the kind of deliverables and outputs from research from a software perspective? Or if it's specifically like a tools and technology, what are the explicit guidance for that grant call, and what is it that they're looking for, and more clarity? Those are the types of things that I would like to see. Yeah.
One of the questions was that it's okay to get funding for creating the software, but it's difficult to keep the lights on once the software is written, particularly if it's going to be reused after the project.
Yeah.
Is that your experience as well?
It is. There's that kind of ongoing question of maintenance, which always comes back and is a constant discussion within research software. So at the Collaborations Workshop and RSE Con, for example. And again, it's acknowledging the different types of calls. So if the software that's going to be delivered as part of a research grant that will provide a service to researchers or maybe to the public, what's the actual sustainability plan for that after the research grant ends? And is there going to be dialogue about exactly what that looks like? But also in terms of tools and technology development, if the funder is willing to fund something that would cut across areas and that would be useful to a lot of people, that can be reused after the life cycle of the grant, after it's been built, what are the long-term objectives, and how will that tool adapt to future innovations and new technologies and emerging kind of innovation that comes out that might mean that the software that has been built or the tool that has been very useful, like how can it continue to be useful in the future?
Yeah.
So these are really important questions.
That leads to another question, because very often these fundings are domain specific, but then the software may cut across domain. Is that sort of something that you recognize as a problem then?
Yeah, absolutely. So just at dinner last night, I had a very interesting conversation about bioinformatic tool development that would normally be, so the tools would be built for different species within specific labs. And there was a proposal that had gone in to make the analysis very generic across species and across different kind of modalities as well. And so it would mean that, some tissues and species might naturally get a lot of funding and be able to develop tools, but then there'd be other things that perhaps wouldn't generate as much funding, and they'd be stuck in a world where they didn't have enough funding to kind of develop the analysis tools that they needed to analyze the data. But structurally underneath, the data is basically identical. So there's no reason why they can't leverage the tools that have been developed for different modalities. And that's exactly what this type of proposal was going for. And again, that was a Wellcome call. It was a Wellcome grant that had been applied for. And I think that Wellcome are especially good at recognizing that type of value and putting out grants. And they're obviously doing a lot of work.
As I mentioned at the beginning, environmental sustainability was the second major theme of this year's collaborations workshop. This is not the first time that the workshop took on the subject of environmental impact in computing. In fact, only during last year's Hack Day, a task scheduler, CADS, was developed that helps you to check the times during which your application uses predominantly renewable energy. And I believe the project even won the best prize for that. To get us started on the subject, we had a panel discussion with Loic Lanelong, Kirstie Pringle, Michael Bain, and Casgold van Prague. Some of you may remember Loic from an earlier episode on greener algorithms, a framework that lets you estimate the carbon footprint of your application. During the panel discussion, Loic announced a community of practice which tries to get the various parties interested in this area together. And Kirstie Pringle from the Software Sustainability Institute is also shoring up support from organizations and tries to bundle this into a special interest group for the Society of Research Software Engineering. And in fact, Kirstie and I have been talking about this offline for a bit. And I caught up with her after the panel discussion. So here she is.
My name's Kirstie Pringle. I'm project manager of the Software Sustainability Institute based in Edinburgh. Before I was project manager of the SSI, I worked as a researcher using climate models, climate and atmospheric models, first as a researcher and then as an embedded research software engineer.
Software sustainability in terms of energy consumption and energy usage is a big theme for this collaborations workshop. And I saw you took part in the panel earlier today. You're also trying to set up a special interest group, aren't you?
I am, yes. So the topic of environmental sustainability is something I've been interested in for a really long time. I think the research software engineers are very well placed to take a really active and really positive role in helping to transition so that research software is more environmentally friendly, more environmentally sustainable, both in terms of education to help people understand what good practices are, and also in terms of helping to develop tools and use tools which will help us quantify the environmental impact of the research software that we're using. So I'm trying to set up a special interest group because at the moment there's a lot of people that are interested in the topic, but there doesn't seem to be much of a forum as yet for people to come together and kind of really share those ideas and share that knowledge. So I think it could be really useful. And because it's a special interest group run as part or as an extension of the Society for Research Software Engineering, I think it can really help to kind of focus the attention of the whole research software engineering community onto environmental sustainability, which I think is a step that we all need to take.
What role do you think that research software engineers can bring in order to make computing environmentally more sustainable?
I think there's lots of different things that could happen. There's a lot of overlap between good software practices and environmentally friendly software practices. So code that's written well with good commenting, good testing, unit testing, code that's been developed in an open and collaborative way often needs to be run fewer times. You've got less likelihood of mistakes being made, and that of course it reduces the environmental impact of the code. Research software engineers have already got a huge role in training people how to write kind of good software, good research software. And I think there could be a huge role for them in terms of helping to train people how to write environmentally sustainable research software and helping people to identify which tools and toolkits could be useful to help researchers try and test to see what the environmental footprint of their software is. I see it a bit of an extension or potentially a specialism within the research software engineering role for those people that do want to specialise in that area. It seems like it's a lot of work that research software engineers already do, but perhaps just with this environmental focus.
Yeah, and I think one of your colleagues on the panel, Loic Lanelong, actually also had the digital certification plan. Is that sort of something that you work with Loic?
Yeah, so Loic developed it and he's run a pilot of this, and taking feedback from the pilot, he's now ready to launch. So it's a certification scheme basically. There's 3 different levels. The foundation level, we've got bronze, which is really just encouraging people. It's a list of suggestions basically for people to go through, looking at the practices that they and their research group are adopting. So it's something that will be hosted on the Software Sustainability Institute website, and it's something the SSI is taking the first steps to go through ourselves, because it's something that we want to focus on too.
Yeah.
There's questions around to make sure that, for example, environmental sustainability is included in the staff onboarding process, which is just kind of common sense. It's about a review of the equipment that you've got. It's looking at the kind of the practices within the institute or wherever you're based to ensure that there's clear good practices there. So it's not, I've not done it yet, so I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but it doesn't seem too onerous, and it seems like a lot of just a collection of really sensible suggestions to go through. And so I'm really excited to see that as a certification scheme, because I think it is kind of about recognition that this does take effort. It does take people time and effort in order to change their practices. And I hopefully having the certification scheme encourages people to make that effort, but also recognises that and rewards that effort.
The last question that I have, and that was mentioned also in the panel, is that the grassroots level, I would say, is probably aware or increasingly aware. As you mentioned before on the Slack channels and here at the Collaborations Workshop, it's a big theme. But sort of the kind of senior management, do you think that it has arrived there, and how can we actually make sure that policies are being changed as well?
I think increasingly universities and other research institutions are placing environmental sustainability at the core. I know in Edinburgh we have a climate strategy, and there's quite high level commitment to ensuring that climate is considered in our actions. I'd really love to see the funders kind of stressing how important this is. The funders really need to take an active role in helping the researchers to follow the best practices and reward people that are following those good practices. So sometimes it might mean that maybe research takes slightly longer, or maybe you do a slightly different. I don't in any way want to distract from the research that's being done, but perhaps if we're having to do it a slightly different way that takes slightly longer, I want to make sure that is available to researchers, and that would have to come really through the funders, I think. So if they kind of value environmentally friendly or environmentally sustainable research as much as possible in the way that they release their funds, I think that would be really nice to see.
The third theme of the workshop centered on citizen science, and Lucy Robinson gave a very interesting presentation about her work at the Natural History Museum and her experience on how citizens can be directly involved with research projects. I wish I could have attended one of the workshops around this topic. Alas, that's the trouble when you have parallel tracks. You just can't be in all of them. Besides, on day 2, I had an important birthday party to go to. The Turing Way, their interactive and open source handbook on how to do data science ethically and better, celebrated its 5th anniversary with cakes, songs, and almost all of the original contributors present. I think the Turing Way is something very special, and I will cover it in an extra episode a little bit later this season, so stay tuned. And now I want to hand over to someone who's been involved in the Collaborations Workshop for so many years, Shoaib Sufi. Sadly, he decided to step down from his current role to focus on other things, but I wanted to find out more about the history of the workshops and how they evolved over the years. So here's Shoaib. Nice to meet you finally face to face. I don't think we've done that before, have we?
We might have seen each other in passing, but we've not sat down and had a chat.
No, we didn't, no. Because you've been with the SSI for how long now?
So I joined, when did I join? I think I joined the project in 2010, maybe 6 months or 3 or 4 months into the first phase.
Right. Was 2010 also the time when the Collaborations Workshop started itself?
So there was a Collaborations Workshop in 2009, but that was an invite only. It's classed as a Collaborations Workshop, but it's a proto one. But then Collaborations Workshop 2010 was the first open one.
Could you give us a quick overview of the history of it all?
So I wasn't involved in the very beginning of Collaborations Workshop. My understanding of the idea was to bring together different computational researchers or people doing software in the actual area. It came out of UK Science Programme. So it was at the tail end of that, OMI UK, and the science programme ran for about nearly a decade, from early 2000s till 2010. And in a sense, the SSI was like a second phase of that. Not of the programme, but it was something which came out of that in terms of a learning and approach.
And you've been actually on the organizing committee, at least, of the collaborations workshop for quite some time. I think this is your last one you mentioned.
Yeah. So I ran 2013 collaborations workshop. I was the event manager or project manager for that.
Yeah.
And then for 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, I was the person leading those. Then 2018 started with me, then it moved to Hanieri Silva. And then 2019, I couldn't actually make because of family circumstances. And then that was completely run by Hanieri Silva. Then Hanieri left and we recruited Rachel Ainsworth. And we were planning to have that at Queen's University, Belfast. But then the pandemic happened.
Yes.
And so we were given a choice by Neil Chu Hong, the SSI director, whether we want to stop and cancel it or whether we want to have a different plan. So we said, well, we've put that much effort into organising it. So we pivoted within a space of a few weeks. We pivoted to online. And so 2020 was online, 2021 and 2022. And then 2023 was the first one that was in person again, and it was hybrid. Yeah, then Rachel moved on to a different post. And then here we are at 24. CW24 was slightly different, but I basically had oversight. So I was training people and going through how to organize it and checking people's documents and co-working on things in the background and doing all those things.
So how has it changed over the years? Has it changed at all? I mean, apart from the fact that it's hybrid, and we can come back to that maybe a little bit later.
Yeah, I mean, I can still remember standing around after Collaborations Workshop 2013. And we had this beautiful venue. I think it was Merton College, Oxford. Very nice venue. It was a specific centre there. And we were all standing together, all the SSI team, looking at each other after it had finished. And it was a good workshop. People enjoyed it. It was very engaging. And then it had mainly had discussion sessions. It didn't have this idea of collaborative ideas. And there was no hack day. So we were looking at each other's faces going, maybe we need to add something because we wanted it to carry on. Right. And, like you do with all of the good things. So in 2013, I believe, was the first hack day. Yeah, because it was the first one. The prizes were quite impressive. I think we had Apple iPads or something as prizes. Oh no, it wasn't Apple iPads. There was tablets, but it wasn't Apple iPads. Apple iPads were in 2014. So the other thing about the discussion groups was that we tried to make that more dynamic. So I think 2013 onwards, we were trying to do this nascent team formation. People came to Collaborations Workshop. We didn't want to say, what do you want to discuss? We want to discuss this. And we make a list and go, okay, well, these are the only discussions happening and you have to go to these. So it was the idea of putting out the discussions that were going to happen, people voting on it and then giving them spaces. So that's been optimized over the years till we got our current system. There's a little bit more horse trading in some of them, where people would champion a particular topic.
Yeah.
And so they'd champion a particular discussion topic. Then they'd have this horse trading about merging topics or splitting topics. Then we introduced the idea of collaborative ideas so that people would come together and include a plan on what they'd like to do. An idea of a solution for something. It wasn't connected to the hack day. You could pitch those ideas for the hack day and then also you could put in hack day ideas. I think for 2015, 2016 was a lot of refinement of getting those things right. And then there were some changes to the program as well, because we used to have Collaborations Workshop 2013 was 4 discussion sessions, and we've just had one. We have one now. But I believe that I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was maybe when we moved to Edinburgh, I think. We had this idea of when we had the output of a discussion session being a speed blog. Before, the output was just people's notes, and afterwards they would just talk about what they discussed. But I thought that was really useless because I'd been in some of those meetings and people coming out and doing this performative act of saying what was discussed. It was just often inaccurate. So it's changed in terms of the sessions. I might need to jump around a little bit in history because this is the process of Collaborations Workshop. So in 2016 we had videos, we had the collaborative ideas. I think 2017, 2018 we put the event organization guide together to describe some of our experiences. We also started to introduce this thing called the social program. So I think it was maybe its most advanced at Leeds. So we were planning for Collaborations Workshop 2020. We had a social program element where the venue was right next to the botanical gardens in Belfast. So we were going to have an afternoon session, which was just networking, where we'd walk to the botanical gardens. That would have been really nice. But we moved online, so there was all the learning about moving online. Then there was the social aspect of moving online, which was very strong in 2021, and also there in 2022, and obviously hybrid in 2023.
So how's the hybrid working then? Because I think it's always a little bit tricky, isn't it? Getting people who are online, kind of making them feel they're part of in the room. So what's your experience been there? No, you've done it in 23 and this year.
So hybrid is really difficult. It's difficult because you're not actually organising one event, you're organising two. And not only organising two, but you're organising two with the bridge between them. In previous collaborations workshops, we were able to, you turn up. People turn up the night before, but you could turn up on the day, in the morning. But in Collaborations Workshop 23, we had to be there half a day before, and for 24, we were there a day before. In 23, the other aspect is the aspect of cost. Because it was an experiment for us, the first time we used a professional AV company.
Yeah.
They were a broadcast company, so they would broadcast, I don't know, Commonwealth Games, that sort of thing. But they weren't that up on hybrid. And that cost a lot of money. It cost a heck of a lot of money. But we learned that we didn't actually need the amount of AV that we hired. It's interesting, the one on cost, for example, the cost per attendee for an in-person person was the same as the cost. We didn't charge the external people that much, but same as supporting an external person because of the cost of the AV.
Oh, right, okay.
But not for Collaborations Workshop 2024, because we realised we didn't need as expensive AV in the breakout spaces. We needed a certain amount of AV in the main space.
You basically stopped doing that, so what's next for you then?
20% of my time currently is working for the eScience Lab at the University of Manchester. So I do management tasks for them, finances and recruitment, contracts, that sort of thing. And then 80% of my time for the last number for SSI phase 1, 2 and 3 have been SSI. So that's been the fellowship program, that's been collaborations workshop, that's been policy work, that's been other European workshops, other aspects of recruitment and finance for the SSI 3 grant. So from the 1st of June onwards, I'll be switching the other way around. So I'll be 80% working on the eScience Lab funds and 20% on SSI funds. So for the SSI side of me, I will be doing oversight of the fellowship program. So we have a new fellowship manager who will be Oscar Sepp. He's also based at Manchester. He'll be working on the fellowship program full time. So the fellowship program is expanding. We're not only having the fellowship program, but we're also trying to build a cohort of fellows mentors, some recruited from the fellowship program itself and some recruited externally. And we hope to make it sustainable for the people involved by paying for some of their time. Not lots of their time, but at least it pays for some of their time so they can say, well, okay, this is dedicated time that I'm going to spend towards this. We're working with OLS on this because they have run mentorship for a while. And so they...
What is OLS?
Open Life Science.
Okay.
And so they have a couple of fellows very involved in that, Yo Yehudi and Malvika Sharan, and Patricia Hertrick happens to, who's the CW24 chair, happens to also work for OLS, but we're hoping to get some of their consultancy to help us run the mentorship program. The other 80% of me, 20% will remain admin. The other 60% of me is working on the project called eVerse. Now, eVerse has an amazing set of people working on it, SSI, Netherlands eScience Centre, European Open Science Cloud clusters, people from Elixir, all sorts of institutions represented, CERN, and it focuses on research software quality. So the idea is to identify what's meant by research software quality and to survey the practices that are happening in the different research clusters, seeing what cross-pollination can occur, and creating training material to help people with their practices, while doing this, or creating a definition of what research software quality is.
As I said earlier, this has been the first time I attended the collaborations workshop in person. It was an intense few days and I was quite frankly knackered at the end. Exhausted, yes, but in a good way. A sensation I seem to share with other participants I talked to. I didn't stay on for day 3, which was dedicated to a hack day, but I can reveal the winner of this year's competition. The prize went to the project team that worked on task management for self-care. And rumour has it that there will be a birds of a feather session about this at the forthcoming RSE conference in Newcastle in September 2024. Finally, a big thank you to the organising team who did a fantastic job to make sure the proceedings ran smoothly and that people felt welcome. No small thing when you consider that running a hybrid event is, as Shoaib just said, running 2 events in parallel. Acting as maitre d' for the proceedings was the wonderful Patricia Hetterick, who steered us through the dense and rich program with a steady hand. There'll be, of course, a collaborations workshop in 2025, and I hope to see a lot of you there again. But before I end this episode, here's a quick announcement. The provider for this podcast show, Buzzsprouts, has enabled an exciting new feature, because as of now, you can contact me directly from the show notes. Simply click on the link at the top that says, send us a text message, and that's it. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.